We're going to
And
talk shit about our families, though. So
mostly Marky's family.
Melky's family, his children.
That's fair.
Hey, welcome to Beer Christianity. My name's John T.
I'm Laura.
I'm Malky.
And I'm Joe.
Joe, hi, and welcome to the show. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners and just tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, I am a man who is trying to redeem himself from a long career as a successful tax lawyer. And my particular mode of redemption is running a not-for-profit that uses strategic litigation and campaigning around strategic litigation to try and create the world that we and our supporters would like to see. It's become quite a big organization in the last couple of years. So at the start of 2020, we had 0 employees, and we now have something like 45, if you include the law firm that we started up about 18 months ago. And we've done all of this without any big donors. We have about 95% of our money comes from regular people giving £2, £5, £10, £20 a month. There are considerably over 30,000 of them. And that means that we're able to be very authentic, I think, very clear in our analysis of what's going wrong. We're not a regulated charity. We deliberately decided not to be a regulated charity because we didn't want to have to stay between the increasingly narrow tram lines that a rather politicized charity commission sets. And I think that combination of not needing to worry about what big donors think of us and not needing to worry about what the charity thinks of us has given us quite a unique tone of voice, which I think resonates with people. I hope it resonates with people. And bizarrely, that sort of harder course, trying to grow a not-for-profit that's not a charity, may well have ended up contributing to our success.
Nice. And I think the tone of voice that you adopt and the work that you're doing has got a lot of support. You were at Greenbelt and people loved what you had to say at Greenbelt Festival. So thanks, Greenbelt, for facilitating this conversation. You have also, it has to be said, got some detractors, some quite famous detractors. I believe Rishi Sunak is not a fan, which is a great badge of honor as far as I'm concerned. But can you tell us a little about that and what their problem is with the Good Lord Project?
Yeah, we have lots and lots and lots of detractors, not 31,000, which is the number of direct debit supporters we have, but we have lots of very high-profile detractors. So last summer, I woke up on my sort of family holiday to read in the Daily Express that Rishi Sunak had branded me public enemy number 1, as the Express described it. There was a big photo of me with a caption, public enemy number 1 underneath it. He had sent out a press release which named me 10 times. He said that unless courts stopped me, Rishi Sunak, would change the law to force them to.
Just normal democracy things there as well.
Perfectly normal in a totally normal, functioning, healthy, mature democracy. James Cleverly has described me as being like a dog returning to its vomit. Suella Braverman has talked about me at great length. The day my book was published, the Mail greeted it with a full-page article, a nice photo. Thank you, Daily Mail, for the nice photo. Headlined, "Is this the most ludicrous man in Britain?" I got into the office and I complained mildly in all the circumstances to the only colleague who was in when I arrived. And she said, "Well, that's a bit silly, Jolyon, isn't it? I mean, there's Nigel Farage and there's Boris, I suppose there's Boris Johnson," as though I was somehow in the running to be the most ludicrous. And another colleague several weeks later then bought me a mug. This is actually my lovely assistant mayor. She immediately changed her LinkedIn profile to E8, the most ludicrous man in Britain, and bought me a mug, which bears upon it the legend, the most ludicrous man in Britain. And the joke in the office at Good Law Project is that only like kind of Arthur's Excalibur, only he who is the most ludicrous man in Britain can lift that mug from the kitchen counter. So yes, we have a lot of powerful detractors.
That is so good, and so impressed with the level of banter from the Good Law Project office. That is fantastic. And like, why do you think it is that you have had had such a massive backlash from these people? And I can't help but think this surely helps your cause, because you're a non-profit called the Good Law Project, and feels like something here is maybe not adding up, hey?
Yeah, well, so these are not stupid people, and they know that to criticize me is to criticize Good Law Project is to breathe into our lungs the air of saliency. They know, Laura, as you rightly point out, that it benefits us. And so you have to ask yourself the question, well, why do they do it? And I think the answer to that question is a lot of it actually is that they feel the need to signal to their own base that they're against us. I think for the people that they want to appeal to, I'm a good target. So Michael Gove went through a period over a number of years of tweeting about me quite frequently. Dominic Cummings yesterday sent out 3 or 4 tweets about me. And I think what they get from it is showing their own side, their supporters, who they are by describing who they're not. And they're not me. They're not somebody who's very, very committed to social justice, who does really, really, I hope we do really good and difficult work trying to do something for the most minoritized communities in the country. We do a lot of work with our trans friends who need, let us not beat around the bush, all the support they can get at this particularly pernicious moment in Britain's history. But I think there's another thing going on as well, which is that we have just been really quite effective. I deliberately set up Good Law Project, and I deliberately arranged my own life so that I would not need to care what these people said or thought about me. Even when I was at the bar, and I did this alongside practice at the bar for a while, I was very cognizant of the fact that if I blew up my practice, if I irritated my clients, that was all right, because they were my clients and it was my practice. And so that had always been a major attraction for me of working at the bar where you're self-employed, as opposed to at a firm of solicitors where if you blow up your practice, you're actually hurting your colleagues as well. And there's just not many people in the country who have the sort of collection of advantages that I have. I'm a King's Counsel, so my voice has some authority. I'm a white, male, cis barrister who's very happily married, who has 3 kids. I have the most boringly conventional life, so there's no basis for them to attack me there. Professionally successful, big audience, in nobody's pocket. And that just gives me enormous freedom and quite a powerful platform. And I want to use it. We've had some proper, real, high-profile, important legal successes, but the bits of our work that resonate with me particularly are the bits when people say to me, thank you for giving me a voice. Thank you for making it possible for me to speak the truth that I see. Thank you for standing up to me, because nobody else in a position of apparent power does. And I don't want to overstate the value of the work that I do or we do, and I don't want to overstate our singularity. But there is something about the freedom that I have and Good Law Project, which is constructed somewhat in my image, has, and the value that that freedom brings and the resonances that that freedom creates for the people we try to talk to and for.
So what are these ludicrous things that you've done? What can you list some of the things that have got you into trouble with these really important people who we all would admire?
Well, so let me give you a couple of things that have really blown up on Twitter, and of course, when they blow up on Twitter, they're in the press as well. So I suppose the most notorious one was on Christmas morning, Boxing Day morning on 2019. I woke up, heard my chickens in the garden, very, very alarmed. Rushed downstairs because, we live in urban London. There are foxes around, and a fox was trying to get into the cage. It saw me and it tried to dive through the chicken wire and got caught. And it was very early. It was, it was 7:30 on Boxing Day morning. And quite inadvertently, I followed exactly what government guidance stipulates, which was that you kill it and you kill it swiftly. And I whacked it with a baseball bat. Anyway, felt like a fairly tooth and claw start to the morning. So I went back to bed and I said, already this morning, I've killed a fox with a baseball bat. How's your Boxing Day going? Anyway, the extraordinary thing about the reaction that followed that tweet was that the reaction ignored the fact that tens of thousands of hunting Tories were wearing top hats and red jackets and on horseback, and they were chasing foxes and they were killing other animals for fun. My tweet, which obviously, and then in the follow-ups, I said that I had grabbed my wife's kimono, which is the Indonesian word for dressing gown. My wife has Indonesian heritage, and had worn that. And so, there were obviously comedic elements to it, which helped the media coverage. But what followed was several weeks, really, of really quite horrific coverage. Was not really about what I had done, wasn't really about whether it was wrong or not, was very much about wanting to punish me, wanting to make sure that I wasn't able to continue the work that I was doing. A little bit like how nobody cares that Boris Johnson said, let the bodies pile high, but we obsessed for weeks about how Ed Miliband ate a bacon sandwich.
Yeah.
Matt Zarb cousin, who was briefly a spokesman for Jeremy Corbyn, is sort of credited on the left as being the man who coined the phrase that the right gets to play politics on easy mode. And the rest of us obviously implicitly play it on expert mode. And I think I learned that on Boxing Day morning. And then I suppose more recently than that, when Rishi Sunak was running for the leadership election against Liz Truss, a competition you would expect him to win, given that he is, despite his many significant failings, which I don't want to understate, plainly a man better equipped for high office than Liz Truss. And I said, do you think that the Conservative Party is ready to select a brown man as leader? And of course, we know that they didn't. And we know that when Liz Truss was kicked out and there was another leadership election, Tory MPs were desperate for it not to go back to the membership. And we know that there was lots and lots of coverage actually about the racism of the Conservative Party membership. But nevertheless, that question, which was applauded actually by many of my black and brown friends on the left, for its ability to carry to ears that would not normally hear that criticism, would not hear it if they had made it, was pilloried in the press. So that James Cleverly spoke about that, Greg Clark, then I think Tory Party chairman, Greg Hands spoke about that. There was lots and lots of aggressive coverage in the usual right-wing newspapers. And dealing with that stuff, which, has a kind of constant baseline level and then peaks and troughs when I say something that people can conjure, sometimes real, but more often synthetic, anger about. Coping with that baseline level of hostility and the peaks of hostility is the most difficult thing that I do, actually, managing what happens between my ears so that I can continue to do the work that I do, which I hope has value, is genuinely very, very hard. And lots of really wonderful public figures are driven out by that coverage, by the kind of constant high level cross media hostility. Even the BBC. So when the BBC carries something about me, it often carries a quote from Dominic Cummings, in which he refers to me as the fox killer. Not relevant for the story. A simple slur, no more than that. No real basis. I did what government's guidance stipulated. I did it for good reason. But the BBC will carry the slur thoughtlessly. And you just have to decide. You just have to make a conscious choice that you will not allow it to drive you out. You will not allow it to stop the work that you do. You try also not to begin to self-censor. You try to find the courage to say things that are true, that reflect the lived experiences, the real lives of many people, but which are never said, or if they are said, are never heard by ears attached to heads of power. And I guess, so a couple of weeks ago, a US hip hop artist wrote a blog about how difficult it is to be a black man, how wounding it is for you to see on the faces of the people, the white faces of the people you meet, fear, how painful it is for people to constantly see you as being a man who is likely to be violent. And I tweeted out his blog, and he wrote to me and he said, thank you. And I said to him, look, the world is complicated, and it's often not easy to find the right thing to do. It's not easy to do things that are obviously, clearly good, but ensuring that a few more people who will read an article that I tweet than will read that article if you tweet it, understand what it is like to live in a white world if you are a black man. That is a thing that is clearly good, easy for me to do, actually, has value. And I get a lot of satisfaction from it, actually, more than anything else I do, I think.
It must be brutal, though, just that level of constant knowing that somebody's waiting to trip you up. And I guess for me, it's the reasons why they're coming after you, because they're using all of these things as pretext to attack you, right? What are some of the cases that have given these people in power the most reason to come after the Good Law Project and after yourself?
So we won a lot of cases during the Brexit years. So the case about whether Parliament needed to consent to triggering Article 50, triggering our departure from the EU. We were the first people to announce we were bringing that case. The case became known as Miller 1, brought by the incredibly courageous Gina Miller. The prorogation case we challenged and obviously we won. A case called Whiteman, which was almost an incredibly consequential case. That case involved, I think, a dozen hearings in the Scottish courts. Government appointed 7 Queen's councillors then was to resist what the Scottish courts wanted to do and did, which was refer to Luxembourg, the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, the question whether the United Kingdom could unilaterally just decide to remain. And I said that case was potentially enormously consequential because there was actually a vote in Parliament, and if Labour had whipped to support it, it would have passed, and the consequence would have been that we would have remained in the EU. And there were some other Brexit cases as well, and more recently, and perhaps this has been more consequential. We all know what happened despite the litigation that Good Law Project brought. More recently, we've exposed sleaze, cronyism, corruption around pandemic procurement. So we discovered the VIP lane. We challenged the VIP lane in court. We had a court declare the VIP lane was illegal. And that work and the stories that we released has created a narrative around the Conservative Party, a narrative that is true, that the Conservative Party is corrupt. And by corrupt, I mean that it passes public money to its friends rather than passing it to those who are in the best position to supply to meet the government's sort of procurement needs. It prefers donors, it prefers associates, it prefers friends, and I would call that corrupt.
Absolutely. So I was having a conversation with somebody today who, so we're a Christian podcast. We have a lot of people who listen to us who are Christians, so there's some that are not. And I was talking to them. They were saying they were kind of calling protest and trying to achieve systemic change pointless, because what can you really do by changing the law? What's the point of trying to change the law? What can you possibly achieve? Why would that even be important? She was talking about it, I think, specifically from the point of view of protesting and campaigning. But from the point of view of an organization that is trying to get laws challenged or changed or introduced, or maybe not introduced, what can you do at this level that the rest of us can't?
So, for me personally, it's not a question that matters. I'll tell you why. And although my values are very closely aligned, almost I would say perfectly aligned with progressive Christianity, I'm not religious. But let me give you a little bit of Pascal. So Pascal's wager was famously that a life for him without the existence of God was a life that had no meaning. And to give his life meaning, he consciously chose to believe in God, because the alternative was to live a meaningless life. And I feel a little bit that way. Actually, I feel quite a lot that way about working to make the world better. I don't really ask myself the question whether it will make any difference. I don't ask myself the question partly because I know I can't answer it, right? The chains of causation are very complicated and are essentially unknowable. We just don't know what changes are caused by our efforts. But what I do know is that, for me at least, it's morally imperative that we try to make the world better. I cannot live a life, a satisfying life in a world with so much wrong without trying to make it better. So it's it's a sort of humanist version of Pascal's wager. Maybe your friend is right. Maybe
he is not.
I don't know. And I would say, Jonathan, you don't know either. But ultimately, nor does he. And what's important is that we do the things that are within our control. There are some things that we can know. And one thing that we can know, one thing we can be sure about, is that actually it's really, really important for all of us as human beings that we try to make the world better. That is a thing that is knowable.
Yeah. And for me also, the fact that the law is something that not everybody can navigate. You know, you can have rights without knowing that you have those rights. You can have rights without being able to access them, which I think is something that's a fairly basic thing that can make your life significantly worse. And the work of organizations like yours seems to be trying to turn the tide of that.
Yeah. So the law is a tool that only lawyers and those with access to the law can use. And I'll come back to talk about that in a second. But I do think that what is true of me as a lawyer is true of everybody, actually. The tools that we have to hand to work for a world that is a better world are different if we are lawyers, or teachers, or social workers, or we work in banks. The tools we have are different, but the principle that we can work for a better world is constant. What Good Law Project tries to do is recognize that the law is very, very expensive, and that one consequence of it being very, very expensive is that only rich people can use it. And because only rich people can use it, the law very often doesn't meet the promise that it makes to people, that promise being a promise that it will be an instrument of social justice. Instead, the fact that only rich people can use it means that it ends up embedding the interests of rich people, which very often are antithetical to social justice. And what Good Law Project tries to do is socialize the power of the law. So that model of tens of thousands of people funding us is a model that shares amongst regular people, people who aren't immensely wealthy, the enormous power that the law has. And there's value in that. I hope.
And we just want to ask about some of the some specific cases that are kind of happening in the world right now. We've got a lot is happening in the world right now. But one of the kind of big things that took place this week was the Supreme Court ruling that the law of sending refugees to Rwanda is unlawful. Is Good Law Project involved in that in any way? And what kind of dangerous precedent is being set by the fact that Rishi's just kind of saying, well, we'll do it anyway, even if we have to defy the European Convention on Human Rights? Yeah.
So very early on, we offered to fund that litigation. We haven't historically done straight up asylum cases, mostly because it's an area that's quite well served by existing organizations. What we did have, because people fund our work and fund it in large numbers, was the ability to offer financial support to organizations that were bringing that litigation. We offered that financial support, although in the end it wasn't taken up. We are looking at whether the promise that Rishi Sunak is making to pass emergency legislation, I'm not quite sure what emergency legislation is, it's not really a term of art, that pretends that the moon is made of green cheese, that pretends, despite what the Supreme Court has said, that Rwanda is a safe place, will itself be amenable to legal challenge. I particularly enjoyed the tweet this morning that I saw of the mayor in Jaws saying that he had passed legislation that the beaches were safe.
Superb.
So we might well, if that legislation is passed, we might well challenge that legislation or challenge its application. Very, very difficult to do because our conception of our democracy is that Parliament can do whatever it wants and the courts will never get in the way. So Lord Hailsham famously described Britain as a... Oh God, it slipped my mind. One must never have beer.
None of us know. We can't come in and save you.
Look, an elective dictatorship, that's what he said.
There we go, nice. You could have said anything and we would not have known.
Well, since we've mentioned the beer there, let's ask what everybody's drinking, actually. Joe, what are you drinking?
So I'm drinking a Q Point Pale from Orbit, which is a brewery in SE17, so sort of central South London, run by some very, very, very nice people. I'm not going to tell you how many beer miles there are, but it is a low number of beer miles. It is not too far from where I live, this brewery, and they make excellent beer.
Fantastic. Well, we should listeners check that out. Malky, what you drinking?
One local to Milton Keynes, San Miguel. Pretty sure it's
Costa del Keynes.
Yeah, and it's one I'm choosing because this is boring, but I'm trying to be gluten free because I think it's helping me, and I'm 99% alcohol free in my life. So, but trying to find alcohol and gluten-free beer, is difficult and expensive. And also at this point, beer is not what you want.
Have a gin and tonic, man. Or tonic. Yeah. Also, if you're looking for gluten-free, alcohol-free beer, is it only a matter of time before the Daily Mail does a story on you? Because I feel like it's like you're everything they hate.
Absolutely. As soon as I get into my tofu, then
that's it.
Yeah.
Workerati that you are. Laura, what you drinking?
I'm on another Thatcher's Haze.
Very nice.
Third in the multi-pack that I bought for the kind of run of Beer Christianity episodes that we're recording.
Oh man, the real deep dive fans are going to love this. It's the fandom's going to go wild to know this.
That's like a weekly run, right? It's not. This isn't the third show back to back recorded.
To be
I was
clear.
thinking how well you were coping, Laura. Still,
Yeah. If I was on my third cider in a row, you would be aware. Like,
She'd be dancing.
There would be no hiding that. As listeners will also know.
Yeah. Long-time listeners will remember.
Oh yeah.
I'm getting sick, so I'm not drinking a beer because I thought if I make myself a Kinshasa, then the vitamin C in the lemon juice will be good. So I'm having a Woodford Reserve and honey Kinshasa, and it's lovely.
So hang on a second. Let me just get this straight. There are 4 of us on the Beer and Christianity podcast. Someone's not drinking alcohol. Someone's drinking alcohol-free beer. Someone's drinking cider. The only person who has actually got a beer with alcohol in it, at any rate, is the guest.
I mean, that is absolutely in keeping with our entire ethos. We had to ask what an ESB was last week, and somebody wrote in and told us, and I've forgotten what the bloody hell it was. I think it's like an English Standard Pale ESP, maybe an ES. I can't remember. Oh damn! Oh, that's terrible. It was lovely anyway. And this has whiskey in it. That's not nothing. It's not nothing, but it's not beer Christianity.
Certainly not beer.
Oh, I feel like we failed you.
Mostly for the pun. It's not for the beer. It's for the pun.
It's mainly for the pun. Another legal case that's happening in the world currently is people saying that they're going to sue Joe Biden. This is in the States. Obviously, it's not what the Good Law Project be involved, but I'd like to hear your opinion of it. Suing Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken for their support of potential ethnic cleansing or genocide in Palestine. What do you think about moves like that? Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa, where I come from, has said that Benjamin Netanyahu needs to be taken to The Hague. Do any of these things have any chance of, doing anything other than making headlines when people say them? Or
yeah, I mean, it's the law is a powerful instrument, but it's not the solution. It doesn't have to international problems, really. Do you think that Putin cares that people in London, theoretically, possibly judges in London, find that he's committing a war crime? Are we going to send policemen over? Is your local Bobby going to hop on a plane to Moscow and walk into the Kremlin and arrest Uncle Vlad and bring him to London to face trial before Bow Street magistrates?
I would pay good money to see it, I'm going to say.
I'm laying it on a little, of course, but these are measures that don't stand the prospect of succeeding in the way, I suppose, that we expect the law to succeed. So they won't, if successful, stop what is happening in Gaza. That's not to say they have no value. I think it's a very common criticism, especially amongst progressives, of action that it won't stop the wrong against which it is directed. But the fact that something isn't a silver bullet doesn't mean that the vampire is unharmed. All actions in defense of values that we care about are worthwhile. And you can't, going back a few minutes in the podcast, you can't predict what they will mean. You can't predict what their consequences will be. And you want everything to be tried because, I agree. I think what is happening in Palestine is really appalling. And the complicity of the international community, much of the global north, if you like, the global minority in it is unforgivable.
And what to this stuff around Palestine and I guess free speech generally, but the fact that I don't know if there's been any prosecutions, but certainly like the police have been on someone's case for flying a Palestinian flag and I'm aware like certain football fans have been banned again just for flying the flag. Where does that sit with the law?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot going on, isn't there, that we really should reflect upon. One thing that's going on is a lot of people who pretend to care about free speech have been revealed not to care about free speech at all, but really to be interested only in attacking those who criticize the often quite hateful conduct of the right. Will Hutton observed the last time this all happened in the 1980s, when we were all talking about political correctness, that figures on the right in the United States worked out that rather than engaging with the demands for social justice that underlay progressive campaigners, it was just much easier to smear them as being politically correct. And the language of free speech and the accusation of, in inverted commas, wokery is just a contemporary iteration of that. And I think one of the things that press coverage of Israel's conduct in Gaza has revealed is that all of these newspapers that pretended to care about free speech care about it not one jot. And I think we all should already know that there is too close a relationship between the police and the executive. I've said many times on Twitter that I think that the absence of investigation and corruption by the police, national crime agencies, fraud offices, because the police know they will be distinctly unpopular if they take a close look into this stuff. I remember the first time I was taking to Glyndebourne, this fancy country opera house, and all of these pillars of society were driving out of the car park in their Rolls Royces at the end of the evening, many of them quite pissed, asking the person who had taken me, my host, why are the police not here? And he said, well, afraid of who they might. And I think that's happened with pandemic procurement. And I think you're seeing it now in the way in which the police respond to the demands of the right, that they clamp down very hard on those protesting against Israel's conduct in Gaza. I mean, you know, another case that Good Law Project brought was a case challenging the Metropolitan Police's failure to investigate Partygate, and we had to sue. They were refusing to investigate. We threatened to sue. We initiated proceedings, and after we initiated those proceedings, they caved and they agreed to investigate. And you know, as we now all know, both Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson were ultimately found to have committed criminal offences. That was what entitled the police to offer them fixed penalty notices, which of course they paid.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about something that you mentioned at the beginning about tax law, and about if there are any tax laws that you think might do with changing. Is the Good Law Project involved in any of that? And have you been involved in any of that? Because it seems to me that tax avoidance, if not tax evasion, does kind of starve the coffers of the money that might be used to make people's lives a little bit better. Does Good Law Project have a view on that?
Yeah, so we wrote about, I wrote in my book about a case that I brought against Uber, or at least against HMRC and Uber, in respect of HMRC's failure to charge Uber VAT. So Uber really ought to have been charging passengers VAT and remitting that VAT to the government. And if it had done, we would north of £1 billion better off than as a country we are. We sued Uber and we sued HMRC, and eventually, although the case legally failed, we did shame HMRC into assessing Uber to VAT. And that was, really quite a conspicuous success. Uber does now pay VAT, which means that the sort of general body of taxpayers, to use a term that tax lawyers use, are not subsidizing Uber users. More recently, we threatened to sue HMRC in respect of a sweetheart deal that it gives to some of the richest people in the country, private equity fund managers. Private equity fund managers pay tax at 28% on their income, which HMRC agrees should be treated as capital gains, whereas primary school teachers pay tax at 48% once you recognise that national insurance contributions is also an income tax. The notion that some of the richest people in the country should be paying much lower rates of tax than nurses and primary school teachers and refuse collectors, I find appalling. We challenged HMRC in respect of that. We uncovered that the sweetheart deal was negotiated by the Conservative Party with the British Venture Capital Association and really imposed upon the Inland Revenue, as it was called in 1987, imposed on a very unhappy Inland Revenue, and has survived ever since. But we also forced HMRC to say that they expected private equity fund managers to file their tax returns on the correct legal basis, abandoning the sweetheart deal that everyone had understood to exist hitherto. And that's very consequential, because it means that if we do have a change of government, HMRC will be released to apply the law properly. And these people who have been underpaying their tax for all of these years, the most recent figures, about 420 million quid is being lost annually. These people will all have to pay the right amounts of tax, will have to pay tax at rates that exceed those that primary school teachers pay at.
Is there any truth to the kind of common response that's like, oh, if you set higher rates of tax, then all these rich people or corporations or banks or whatever will leave, and we won't get any income tax from them?
The truth is that all of these things are complicated and essentially unknowable. We don't know how people respond when we raise tax rates. It's very, very difficult to model. Every situation is different. It is likely that if you raise tax rates by a very substantial amount, that some people will leave. But I don't think that's a good enough reason for embedding tax injustice. It's also perfectly possible that raising tax rates will generate much, much higher levels of revenue. There are lots of examples of people going to live in tax havens, very, very wealthy people going to live in tax havens, and having more of what they already have a lot of, money, but quite a lot less of what they really want, which is the ability to enjoy their money, and deciding to come back to the United Kingdom. And that's another reason why really it's difficult to model what the sort of short and long-term consequences of raising tax rates are. I don't think I could say that it doesn't happen, but I think it's also true to say that it's probably overstated. And nobody's talking about raising tax rates to the sort of 97% that we had in the 60s and 70s, where we had a sort of super tax, and people genuinely were keeping 3 pence of every pound that they earned. We're talking now at the moment about, the additional rate of tax is 45%. National insurance contributions are 2%, so that's 47%. And some very substantial types of wealth are not taxed at all. I think, there is probably more room to tackle properly capital gains and inheritances than there is to raise substantially rates of tax on income. There are lots and lots of ways to skin the proverbial cat that are likely to be more productive than raising the headline rate of income tax. I was advising the Labour Party on tax in 2015. It's not impossible. I will advise the Labour Party on tax if it gets into government. I have good relationships with some of the frontbench team. And I think what I would be urging on them, if that were to happen, is that they look at tackling loopholes, they look at resourcing HMRC properly so that nobody very, very well to evade is that probably there's quite a lot of easy money to be earned there for the public rather than raising the headline rate of income tax.
We're coming to running out of time, but I wanted to ask, if you had to have 3 victories, legal victories, that you think if Good Law could win these, they would make such a difference to this country or to the world, but to this country for what you want to do, what would they be? Your top 3?
We need focusing on the intergenerational consequences of climate change. One of the problems that the law has as an instrument to tackle climate change is that judges are very used to looking at historic wrongs, wrong things that have happened, and giving to the people who are the victims of those wrong things that have happened money to compensate them for those wrongs. And although that has some merit, it's not a tool it's not a feature of the law that makes the law particularly useful as a tool to tackle climate change, because money cannot make the world healthy again. It cannot compensate people for an overheated, dying planet. And judges need to start to focus on what the evidence proves are inevitable baked-in future wrongs. And instead of looking to provide financial compensation for for historic wrongs, they need to prevent future wrongs from happening. So those sorts of intergenerational aspects of climate change, I think, are incredibly important, and I guess those would be probably my 1 and 2. I am constantly looking for ways to tackle the epidemic of sexual violence that women in patriarchal societies, most societies, are subjected to. We have homeopathic rates of conviction for rape in the United Kingdom. It's effectively decriminalized. If a friend of mine was raped, I don't think I'd encourage her to go to the police the system is painful and all the evidence suggests is unlikely to deliver to her justice. And it's very good at ensuring that innocent men are not convicted. And of course, there is value in that. But if you attach too much value to that, you betray the women who will be raped because the law has failed to deter it. So I find agonizing, really, the failure of the law to tackle sexual violence against women and the failures of our politicians really to take it seriously enough. A number of women I love and have loved have been the victims of rape or sexual assault. And I think it's a profound wrong that we do not take rape and sexual violence more generally as seriously as we should. I mean, I pretty much bet that every woman listening to this podcast has tucked into her psychological back pocket a moment of profound trauma that she struggles with, and she struggles with the consequences of even today. And that's really an epidemic of psychological harm that the law does little or nothing to prevent. So I think climate change would be my 1 and 2, and better laws that recognise the scale and severity of sexual violence against women would probably be my number 3.
That's an excellent top 3. Absolutely. Joe, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I'd love to give the listeners some chance to kind of engage more with what you do. Could you tell them a little about a book that you've written, and also about how they can follow what the Good Law Project does and support the Good Law Project?
Thank you. That's the question my publisher has been waiting for. The book is called Bringing Down Goliath. It got a very, very hostile critical reception. I regard that as a badge of success, really. It's a book I'm very, very proud of. Despite that hostile reception, it charted at number 3 in the hardback charts. And it talks about the work the Good Law Project does. It tells something of my own personal story, which is really important. It drives the work that I do. It's not something we've had time to talk about today, but it is very important to me. And if you buy that or you listen to the audiobook and you like it, you can also get to know Good Law Project's work better. Our website is goodlawproject.org. You can join our mailing list, and over time you'll become more familiar with our work. We have a Twitter account, we have an Instagram account, we have a TikTok account, and I can assure you that you can follow that TikTok account safe in the knowledge that I will not be seen strutting my dance steps anywhere on or adjacent to it. And I also have a personal Twitter account. I'm not going to call it X or whatever stupid name that horrible Elon Musk has given it. That's probably the best way to get to know our work. I'm incredibly grateful to you all for hosting me. It's been the loveliest experience. And I hope listeners have found it interesting.
Well, we found it fascinating and really encouraging, and we just want to say all the best in what you guys are doing, because you are quite literally doing God's work, and quite figuratively as well. So thank you so much for what you do, and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks ever so much.
If you want to listen to more of our episodes, you can find us at beerchristianity.co.uk. You can find us on all the regular social channels at Beer Christianity or Beer Exianity. We're on Insta. We're on X/Twitter. Let's call it Twitter. Let's dead name it for him, since he's so anti-trans. And you can find us. You can email us at beerchristianity@yahoo.com. And please do get in touch. Tell us what you think. Send questions, send comments. Thank you very much for your support. Check out the newsletter. You can find it at beerchristianity.substack.com. And yeah, thank you so much, Joe. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.